Scale Up, the podcast for driving growth in your MSP, delivered by industry experts. Hello everyone, welcome back to Halo House for another episode of Scale Up. We're again joined by our good friend Mit Patel, and today we're going to be talking about the importance in data for driving business performance in your MSP. So we've spoken about the importance of setting that goal, that 5-10 year plan. It's worth taking some time to discuss how you as an MSP know where you are on that journey. So Darren, do you have any thoughts on that matter?
Yeah, I think what we see in the community and what I've seen in my history is high performing, high mature MSPs are driving their business from data. And that data needs to be spread across the whole business, and you need to be able to communicate what does good look like for that department, but also that individual. That individual needs to feel like they're having a successful day, week, year, etc. You know, are they making that input into the business that they're actually happy with, and that it's moving the needle for the business? And I think the only way to do that is having good, solid processes and data, and then those KPI points, those scorecards that we've talked about a few times. You know, those scorecards are critical, that people need to know what does that good look like, and it's got to be relatable to their business. And I think the big thing that I see around KPIs is less is more. You know, we see so many people that have got like dashboards and gauges just everywhere. And it almost takes them 4 days to look at the data before they can even make a decision. And really less is more.
Yeah.
And also, if you're going to give somebody a KPI, they've got to be able to actually move that needle on their own against that KPI. Again, typically we see people have got figures that they're tracking themselves and the department on, but they can't. There's other people impacting those data points.
So we can unpack that quite a bit, and right at that top level, I think we can break it down into an input and an output, where the outputs are the dashboards, the reports, and the inputs are the actual processes that are being put in place. So what do you think are the most important processes that an MSP should be worrying about?
I think, first of all, it all comes back down to finances. You need to make sure you've got the right data points in your finance, and it's broken down into the right buckets. You know, you're looking at revenue or costs, etc. Is those data points into the right buckets, and are you comparing those against each other, as in what does best in class look like? So you know where you are financially and what decisions you can make in the business.
Cool.
What do you mean by best in class, Darren?
So best in class comes from a model that we've used for quite some time in my history. It comes from a company called Service Leadership, run by a gentleman called Paul Dipple. And he basically created a platform where let's rephrase that. So 5,000 MSPs put their P&L in a set format, and they put that into the system. The top quartile performing MSPs out of that pot are then averaged out. So then we can look at, actually, if we want to be one of those top performing quartile MSPs, them's the best in class figures that we need to be able to achieve within our MSP. And also we know they're achievable. It's not just my gut feeling that tells me we should be able to get 21% net profit, for instance.
And when you say kind of top performing, what do you mean by top performing? Because I get the top quartile. What does top performing mean?
So the people that are growing the revenue at the same time as growing the profitability, and having that operational maturity to push it forward to build an asset.
Okay.
Right. And in terms of what is classed or what is tracked as best in class, what does that look like? Are we talking about service? Are we talking about revenue? Are we talking about project work, or all of the above?
So typically in the service leadership model, it's all about the financials and the cost of service. So it's broken down from that P&L around the revenue, then the cost, and that's then brought into your service gross margin. And then off the back of that, you're then bringing in all your costs below the line of your business, and then your actually breaking that down then into calculations. They've done calculations to say, if you've got this cost and this revenue, what's that running at? If you've got this revenue, what marketing budget should you be applying to that revenue? Because those best performing MSPs, that's what percentage they are doing.
So generally, just so the people can understand on the podcast, like what would you say best in class gross margin percentages for service? So if you've got a service desk, you've obviously got people there and you've got revenue there. What would you say best in class is like as a gross margin?
Yeah, so service gross margin is 51%.
Okay.
So your managed services MRR should be running at 51%. So that's taking in consideration the revenue you're getting off that business, the hard COGS that it takes to deliver those services, and also the tool COGS. You know, those hard costs are your tool costs and also your labour costs.
What would you say hard COGS are? Just so not everyone might understand what sits in there.
Yeah, so your hard COGS are all the items that you're using to deliver that service. So, for instance, you may have some PSA licenses. You may have, let's say it's an antivirus service. You would have an antivirus license. You're then going to have the fully burdened rate of those engineers to deliver that service. And that's why it's key as well to have the right data points. You know, we've talked a lot about the accuracy of data points. We need to make sure that we're putting the right labor item, i.e. that time your engineers are spending, against the right revenue pot, because then we know what those actual profitability of that service is. All of that's rolled up into a pot of managed services, and that managed services should be running at 51%.
And if you're not best in class, what do you suggest an MSP does operationally to make those changes?
Yeah, so first of all, what we see is the data points first. You've got to make sure that you're actually collecting accurate data. You know, you don't want to be making decisions on inaccurate data.
Sure.
So we want to make sure the actual processes, the systems, the data is accurate. Then we've got to look at actually what's wrong here. Is it costing us too much to deliver the service? So we're inefficient. It's training, it's processes. Have we picked the right solution? Have we implemented it correctly? Are we trying to actually, you know, we've all been there. We're cleaning up the mess because the project team didn't deliver it properly in the first place because it wasn't structured. And then we're looking at our tools. What's our tools costing us? Are we getting those tools for the right price? And then typically what we find is people are selling services to match the next door MSP. You know, we're selling it at this price because that's what our salespeople believe we can sell it at because they're up against the next door MSP. Where actually what we need to be doing is looking at what's our cost of delivering, adding 51%, and that should be the retail price of that service.
That's an interesting idea. Yeah. And I guess as a bit of a tangent to that, how important do you think it is for the team that you're managing to be invested in that data? Is that something that they should even know? Is that something that should be relayed to them in the monthly reviews with the team? Is that something that you want your team to care about? What do you think about that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, those successful MSPs, you know, it's about the wider whole. You know, you need to be able to have your team all going in the right direction. And one thing that we learned and we implement within our partners is it all starts with a why. You know, if you put a KPI in front of someone, you put a data point in front of one person, they need to understand the why. Why are we doing this? What's the difference this going to make? But also, you know, why are we doing this for the business? But also, why are we doing it for me? So what's in it for me as well as the business? You know, how is this going to make my life easier? How is this going to move the business forward? How is this going to move my career forward?
Yeah.
And, you know, they've definitely got to be invested into that. And they've got to be invested into why we believe it's 51% as well.
Yeah.
You know, it's not just my feeling. We have these data sets that are telling us this is what we should be doing.
Yes, I think it's like Darren said. I think it's really important to explain why you're measuring something, but you've got to be measuring the right thing. So I've seen a lot of people look at the wrong things to measure. So, for example, a lot of people measure CSAT, so customer satisfaction. So someone closes a service ticket, they get a couple of smiley faces. They click on a smiley face, you get a number. So people say, oh, my CSAT's 90% positive, or it's 60% positive, or whatever. But what I've generally found with that is people only fill in CSAT stuff when they're really happy or when they're really pissed off, right? You don't give a 6 or a 7 or an 8 or a 3 or a 4. You're like really happy or really pissed off. So one of the things we used to measure in my old business was the response rate. So actually, how many people are responding to the CSAT survey? That gives you a much better idea of actually, are people happy or are people unhappy? The more people that respond, the more likely they are to be happy.
I think that's a great example, though, mate, of one thing I've seen is, you need to make sure the data's right, but you also need to make sure it's actually right and they're not gamifying it. So the CSAT's a great example. I've seen MSPs where, they have a service ticket, they're looking for that green face, but what they're actually doing is saying, Mr. Customer, you're really happy, aren't you? I'm not going to put this phone down until you press green, because you're really going to press green, aren't you? And we really want each other to press green. Have you pressed green yet so I can put this phone down? And yes, they've got a 99, 100% CSAT result. But actually, is that driving the business forward? Or have we just caused an issue? Like, last week was a great experience. I learned that a doctor's practice actually gets penalised for not giving you an appointment the same day you ring. So all doctors now don't allow you to make an appointment the day before. You have to ring at 8 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, is that why that happens?
So you have to ring at 8 in the morning. And guess what? You'll get an appointment today, sir.
Yeah,
and we will meet our target for the government.
But you literally have to ring between like 8 a.m. and 8:15 a.m.
Yeah, and because that's the time that they have available in their diary to fill that diary. After 8:15, they don't want you to ring again because they're going to book an appointment for tomorrow and they'll miss their SLA.
So gamification's it's a fine line to ride before you start fudging the numbers to fit the metric.
Yeah, and what's the benefit to the business though? Yes, you're hitting that SLA, you're hitting that CSAT, and you can present that to your peers and you may look amazing, but there's a reason why it's too high. We need to get a benefit from monitoring that data or that KPI. If you're just going to gamify it and make it look amazing, what's the reason for that? What's the benefit to the business?
So, guys, what should the NHS? What should they be measuring then in this case? It's an interesting one.
It's great, isn't it? They've obviously realised that I'm getting penalised for it, so now I'm going to make you call at 8 o'clock in the morning and only allow you to do it until our calendars are full.
Yeah, but they at that point, you change the goalpost and they fudge the numbers to fit it to that different metric. So. I didn't know that. That's quite
I mean, that's the key thing that we see across a lot of partners is you're not realizing what behavior you're creating. As soon as you put a figure in front of somebody and say, I want you to hit this single figure, you've got to be really careful that that's a behavior you're creating. So like if you look in the service department and you say, I'm going to monitor closed tickets. As an engineer, I want you to close 12 closed tickets a day. You're going to create a behavior there of possibly all I'm going to be driven for now is closing tickets. So I'm not going to care about fixing the customer's problem. I just need to hit number 12 because then I keep you off my back.
So maybe that's an interesting point, and it goes back to this understanding the why you're tracking those data points. What you really want to do for your team is you want to tell a story and you want them to believe in that story, believe in that why, and you want the data to be backing up that story. And so maybe providing a layer of abstraction to that data is the way to go there. Instead of just saying, we're looking at how many tickets you're closing a week, or we're looking at how many first-time fixes, or how many appointments you've got in the same day, maybe we obfuscate that slightly. Management can have a look at those core data points, but the team are just looking at one number, a metric, a gauge, whatever it is. So they don't really know exactly what is leading towards that number, but they know the story and they know the what.
I think going back to Darren's earlier comment, which is probably referenced from a book called The 3 Signs of a Miserable Job. I think number 1 is having autonomy, number 2 is having purpose, and the third thing is knowing actually have I done a good job or a bad job at the end of the day, right? So they have to be some numbers or some way of that person knowing, hey, I've had a good day, or no, I've had a terrible day. The book's written by Patrick Lencioni, I believe is how you say his surname. He's actually presenting a IT by Designs event in Orlando. I think you guys are going to be there anyway.
Yeah,
but, definitely make sure that you watch his stuff. It's really good.
Yeah, so there's logic, isn't there, behind it? Why are we doing this? And I think I think sort of the opposite, really. That we don't want to present one number. We want to present a collection of numbers that create a picture.
Sure.
And it's creating a behaviour and an outcome that we are going to drive forward. And also, those numbers and outcomes need to drive to that ultimate plan. Everything should cascade from the top What are we running this business as from the top, as in the value creation plans that we've talked about a number of times, all the way down to the single person on the front line? There should be a link all the way up and down, and we need to make sure we're creating that right behaviour.
How do you pick the right numbers without creating the wrong behaviour, I suppose, is the question.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, and I'm not sure I've got the full answer to it, but I've made a lot of mistakes in the way. Typically I see, including myself, we create loads of gauges, loads of dashboards, loads of information, or we give them the one information and we create the wrong behaviour. And I think there's a fine line and there's a balance. I've also seen it in sales. If you create a certain commission plan and a certain KPI in sales, you will create a certain behavior of a salesperson, and that can be toxic in the environment. So I think you need to definitely look at what does good look like for that individual, what's the best input to the business, and what's that department got to do to the business, and how you're going to drive that forward. And typically I also see it links back to your USPs. So why do you win business over your competitors? And really analysing that and looking, what is it that we do differently, and why do customers come to us and stay with us? Asking our customers that have been with us a long time, why are they with us? That is probably a good starting point of what you want to track.
Morgan, as we're quite close together now, I'm going to ask you a question around Halo.
Yeah.
There must, obviously you're a much larger organisation, you've probably got, 250 people, something like that?
Just shy of that, yeah.
Just shy of that. But what are the things that you guys measure as a business? I think it'd be quite interesting to understand, because it may be a bit of a crossover from the MSP industry as well. But what are the things that you guys measure?
Yeah, well, I mean, of course, we're not an MSP, but fundamentally, we're not too dissimilar from MSPs in that we're concerned with providing excellent service. And so a lot of those reports are similar to the reports that I see MSPs use on a day-to-day basis. First time fix, time to close, closure rate. Of course, we're looking at our MRR. We're looking at churn rate. It's a lot of the same data points that MSPs are looking at. And I've also seen firsthand the negative of gamifying data, where we have reports that go out for service stats, and by making the metrics too explicit, we were driving the wrong behaviour. It's not just about how quick can you close a ticket. It's about how quick can you close a ticket correctly and providing that level of service that we want to ensure we're providing.
Yeah, and you don't want that ticket to, like in the MSP game, you don't want that ticket to come back like a day later. Yeah. Because then someone's going to have to work on it and spend time. And I suppose service is like time and cost, right? Because time costs money, but if the ticket comes back 3 or 4 times, that's going to cost you 60 minutes versus 20 minutes if you just did it the right time.
Yeah.
The right time.
Yeah. I think the other thing we see as well is people make it too complicated. And so you need someone to work it out that's got a financial head, and it takes them months to do that. And so the person that you're actually giving those KPIs or that data point to, or the department, can't see it live. So I think that's another critical point, is whatever data point you come up with, those individuals and teams need to be able to see that live at the time they want to see it, so then they can pull levers to move that business or that department forward.
For sure.
I mean, I've seen it work well before, where you have a number that goes green or red depending on where it fluctuates through dashboards and stuff like that. Yeah. But like you said, having less numbers is better.
For sure.
I mean, we used to have kind of 15 KPIs per department and 1 at a leadership level. You weren't allowed to have any more than 15 because you just end up in KPI chaos. KPI chaos. That's a new thing I'm going to coin, guys. Right?
That's a good idea as well. Limiting the number of KPIs you track makes you think about what numbers are important.
Yeah.
So
because otherwise people just want to add on and add on and add on, and by the time you're done, you've got like a spreadsheet that has 30 things on it.
Yeah.
I think one of the good ones that I saw, I totally agree, mate, around the colours. Otherwise it's just numbers, and we all get just blinkered to numbers. The colours mean something, but also the colours mean something in a process. So when this goes yellow, I expect it to be your responsibility, and this is the process that's going to happen off the yellow. When it's red, it's going to be somebody else's responsibility, and that's their process that's going to go off. So there's almost like a built-in escalation point inside that dashboard, so then the numbers and the colours mean something. The other thing that I've seen work really well, especially in operations department, is a dashboard called Manage to Zero. So rather than you having random numbers across the dashboard, one might be 16, one might be 20, they all might mean something different. What you actually do is you zero that dashboard out. So if 20 is good, then that becomes 0 and 21 becomes 1. So the whole of the dashboard should actually be 0. And then when it equals a number, there's a reaction to be had.
That's an interesting idea as well. So you're kind of changing what you consider to be valuable in terms of what you're getting out of the data. You're looking at fluctuations from the norm as opposed to the actual numbers themselves.
Yeah, because if you've got lots of different data points on a dashboard or a report, sometimes it can be quite confusing, but also your mind just blinkers out to all these different numbers and you've got random things going on across the dashboard, where actually if you have a fine amount of items and it's 0 and it's got colours on it, that's going to equal the best result.
I think the numbers thing is pretty cool what you're talking about there, because I went to the opticians yesterday. You must have been to opticians recently in the last couple of years.
I haven't, no.
Morgan, you need right after this podcast, you're going to have to go to opticians. but essentially, they make you look for these things, and it's like there's a number. Is it clearer on the green side or the red side? And I'm always looking through it, going, I can't really tell the difference, mate. If it's clearer on that one or that one, I said, am I meant to know the difference? She's like, well, sometimes you don't need to know the difference. So that's helpful. But going back to your bit of having that normalization of the numbers, I think that really helps, because sometimes you just get those high numbers, low numbers, green, red. I think it's a lot easier, actually.
And so Mitt mentioned tracking 15 KPIs per department. How many KPIs per department do you think MSPs should be tracking?
I think 15 KPIs, correct me if I'm wrong, mate, I think what we sort of talk about is 15 KPIs at SLT. So a section of those KPIs will be across the departments.
Okay, so 15 in total.
At SLT, running the business, we have 15 key KPIs that run the business. Then those KPIs will flow down into other KPIs inside those departments. At SLT, we don't need to know those others, but you need to know them as the representative at SLT for that department. So if that number's wrong, that number will maybe contain another 5 numbers, but you know which one of those 5 is off course. And so then you can talk about why that number is off course.
So it's your responsibility as the leader of a team to make sure that one number on the SLT dashboard is where it needs to be. And if it's not, you should know why it's not.
And generally, it's a pretty top level number anyway. Sure. So the things that you're measuring in the finance department, and I would only have a maximum of 15. Again, sometimes it was a lot less. That's in your control. So those KPIs, if they're all green, means that number above that you have to report into SLT is green. And we used to make department leads purposely fill that number in a spreadsheet rather than it just get the data from somewhere, just because it made them actually think about, oh, right, that's the number, and I'm going to have to explain if it's up or down.
Interesting.
So if we think about the key functional areas then within MSP, we've got finance, we've got operations, we've got sales. We may also have marketing, depending on the size of the MSP. What do we think are the key numbers those departments need to look at?
So, I mean, from operations, in particular from service, we should absolutely be concerned with our SLA compliance. If we're not tracking that, then it's important, one, because that ties into the sales process nicely, because you put that on your proposals and prove that you can provide the level of service that you want to. It's also important to make sure that the customers are getting the answers that they need when they need them. I think generally across the board, you should be concerned with the amount of time that it takes to do anything in your business, because fundamentally, you talk about that burden rate. Well, that's your monthly recurring cost, and the profit that you have from that, from the labour perspective across the board, is directly related to the amount of time that it takes any one individual to do anything. And then, of course, beyond that, you've got the financing points that Mitt, you might want to talk about.
Yes, I think from a finance point of view, what's useful to know and think is the MRR number. So generally, businesses who are MSPs are trying to drive that MRR number up. They're trying to get as much cover for that MRR number against their operational expenses. valuation is kind of driven by MRR number, and I suppose everybody's trying to build something of value. So that's the first thing that we would normally look at. The other thing that we used to look at was like debtor days, like debtor days over X. So if it was over 60 days, just to make sure we were getting paid on time. Once we fully moved everybody over to direct debit, that became less and less of a problem, so then we put something else in. So that's an example of when a number is normalized now. It's under control almost. You don't need to have the focus of leadership team anymore. You put something else in. But yeah, finance, MRR, debtor days. We'd also probably look at like cash flow, if that was a potential issue, just to make sure that you've got enough cash in the business at that point of time.
The debtor days point is interesting because I think it's quite a good idea for MSPs to effectively tier their customers. Looking at debtor days being an example, looking effectively how profitable is this one particular customer, tiering them accordingly and trying to always go for more tier A customers and doing what you can to move your customers from tier D all the way up to tier A. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that's a great data point to do. I mean, we have always categorized ours into 4 categories. Mm-hmm. So the A was, like you say, the A class. We're getting really good profitability from them, but also that can be also a risk. If it goes too high, we're concerned about that as well. But then the D's is the one that we put a lot of process around. So they're the ones that we're basically paying to be with us. And so one of the processes, for instance, was that the salespeople could no longer attribute discounts to those accounts. So if they're selling something, it has to be the retail price. Mm-hmm. The other one would be that we would be looking at their accounts, looking at the services we provide, looking at the technology stack, analysing from a problem management point of view the ticket flow that we're getting from that customer. So we'd be analysing the types and the ticket categories and the response times and the amounts to look at, actually, is there some trends here that we're causing? We're not getting to the bottom of some actual root problem, or we're not advising the client to change their technology stack, or we're not fixing something that's causing a reoccurring issue and we're actually getting rid of it and replacing it to actually increase that profitability of that client. Then ultimately at the very end of that, you're going to be approaching the customer that something needs to change. Either your people need to use us less, or we need to increase the price that we charge for this service. And doing that on a frequent basis means that we're approaching customers with a small percentage rises or small changes to their environments. I think what we see a lot is that people only do that once a year, sometimes once every 3 years when the contract comes up for renew. And now you're talking about increasing that customer's price by 10, 12%, not 2-4%.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. I mean, one of the things we used to do is measuring profitability, like of those clients month to month. And that's great by itself, just measuring month to month. But then you kind of think, well, I need to see that on some sort of trend. So we used to have on a slide profitability and then offending customers. So you'd see that, be like, oh, okay, they're 3 months worth of offending or 4 months. Question I've got for you guys around KPIs actually. Is just thinking back to what we spoke about before, which was having sometimes you have loads and loads of data and there's too many KPIs. Like, what do you guys think about having KPIs that you can actually act on? And what I mean by that is you should only really have numbers and KPIs in there that you could actually do something about. So if they're going one way, you could act on. If they're going another way, you could act on. What do you think about that?
What numbers can't you act on?
I think there are some KPIs which just stay the same, and then you can't actually do anything to those numbers anymore. A bit like where I gave the example of the debtor days. What we actually did was within Xero, we put in something that sends out monthly statements. We moved everyone on direct debits that weren't. We made some other actions. So we've done 3 things. I think it was Statey, the app. 3 things that basically made sure that we wouldn't have clients pay us late. Mm-hmm. We set up reminders, I think, in Xero as well. So we never had that problem anymore. So every month we're looking at this number and it's the same number. Debtors over whatever days, it was less than £5,000, less than £5,000. So it was like, well, we're not acting on this number anymore. So that's why we need to do, move it out and get something we can act on.
Yeah, I mean, I think another great example of that is actually putting a data point, a KPI in front of somebody that somebody else is having an effect on. You know, if you put a profitability KPI in front of someone that's in charge of operations, they can definitely affect that from a performance of the team to make sure that performance and that cost we've talked a lot about labour costs, that time and that labour cost and the tools they use are matching the required amount. But ultimately, if the salesperson is selling the Lada service and you're delivering the Ferrari service, you're never going to equal that profitability. And so that number, that person in operations can't make a difference apart from voicing that concern.
I agree. However, I still think you can always act on a number. And I think that it's probably a question around defining what you consider as requiring action, and also determining who needs to take that action. So, but I don't think there's any number that cannot be acted on. You should be trying. If a number is not where you want it to be, you need to do something about it. And it might not be immediately obvious what it is that you need to do, but there is something that you need to do. There is something that you can do, because ultimately, going back to best in class is from real world data. So if you're not best in class, it's because you're not doing something right.
Yeah, I would agree. There's either, ultimately it stops with a business owner, but also there's probably somebody in the business that can make a difference.
Yeah.
But you need to make sure it's with the right person, because if it's with the wrong person, they can't make a difference.
I think my comment comes from another experience I had, which was I was sitting in a department meeting and they had all these numbers and they were showing the same numbers every month in, month out. And I'm sitting there going, well, that number's the same as it was a month before. That number's the same as a month before. On a leadership level, it's very different because the numbers green mean everything's okay, right? But on that level below, they were effectively measuring stuff for the sake of measuring it.
Yeah.
And they couldn't actually make any analysis or changes to change that number.
That's a really important point. I think everyone bangs on about tracking data, but I don't think there's enough discussion on actioning on that data. So you've got a dashboard, you've got these KPIs. Well, if you don't do anything about it, if you don't act on those metrics, then what is the point in tracking them in the first place?
Just take them off. I think a lot of larger MSPs, I've seen some that end up in a situation when they're at the board level and they're saying, we want to see this data, we want to see this data. I've seen like board packs that are like 160 pages long that take people 3 days to produce. And then it's like, well, do you actually need to know all this data? So you just got to make sure, I suppose, to check on a regular basis, maybe quarterly, that is this still valid, this thing we're measuring? Because it's taking somebody time in your business to put this together.
Yeah. Another KPI.
Yeah, there you go.
So great speaking with you guys again. In summary, what do you think are the most important takeaways of this episode?
Yeah, so for me, the main thing is, your core systems, especially your PSA, structuring that in a way that's going to get those data points, and those data points are going to be accurate.
Yeah.
And I think measure less. So measure 15 things or less. Make sure those things that you're measuring, you can actually have a discussion about. So that's the key. Like, you can discuss those KPIs, wherever they are. Those are the two things I think people should really do.
Yeah. And I would say make sure you're tracking data that is actionable, and make sure the individual who should be actioning it is the correct individual to be doing so. Yeah. And on that note, thank you very much for coming back to Halo House, and I'll see you again soon.
Super.
Okay.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode of Scale Up, don't forget to like and subscribe. If there are any topics that you would like to see on a future episode of Scale Up, please leave a comment below.